Welcome to the Mental Fitness Podcast in partnership with Eliza Chat, where we explore real tools and stories for building mental strength in the modern world.
Yeah, I'm Dr. David Morgan. I'm a licensed psychologist. I got my bachelor's, master's, and PhD at BYU, Brigham Young University. My PhD is in counseling psychology, which is often applied in secondary education settings. But what I found very quickly is it just depends on where you end up getting experience. And so I ended up doing about 25 years in forensic psychology, working for the criminal justice system in Washington State, where we lived for 25 years. And I've done a lot of contracted work for the state as well. I've evaluated or treated more than 15,000 clients during my career, and finally got to the point where I'm kind of retiring from the clinical practice and focusing more on how to help businesses understand mental health so they can improve productivity, improve retention, and just create a better culture of mental health in their organizations.
Yeah, awesome. Why don't we just start talking about, you've been working as a psychologist for many years, and I don't know how long you've sort of specialized a bit in workplace mental health, but why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey as a psychologist around workplace mental health?
Yeah, so I was originally licensed as a psychologist in 2002. And this is 2025, so that's 23 years. For most of my career, I did work in the forensic space. I did a lot of work with the criminal justice system, the courts, and I enjoyed that quite a bit. And then transitioned into work with Washington State. We lived in Washington State for 25 years and then moved to Utah about 2 years ago. Once I got back here, I realized that I wanted to kind of shift my focus on things. And that's when my interest in workplace mental health started to become significant, because what I was seeing is that particularly Gen Z, they're bringing their mental health issues to the forefront of their lives, which is a great thing to do. In years past, it's always been something that people have downplayed. There's so much stigma, and now we're talking about it more, we're addressing it more, but it's starting to be in the workplace as well. And so I thought I need to help HR and managers understand how can we help these people, number one, and then how can we reduce the stigma in the workplace settings for legal reasons as well, because mental health is a protected condition under the American with Disabilities Act. And so employers need to be careful that they are treating it as such, to avoid litigation and those sorts of things.
Interesting. So you saw the trend of just the conversations and the conditions kind of coming into the workplace. And so then you sort of said, let's follow that, and pivoted to that. And
yeah. I had a friend who worked in HR for his entire career. He recently retired. And one of the issues he said is that when you're dealing with workplace interruptions, he says if you can plan for them, that's much better. Like if someone comes to you and says, hey, I'm going to be gone for 4 weeks in 2 months' time, then you can gear up for that. It's a problem when people come in on Friday and say, oh, by the way, I'm going into inpatient substance use treatment on Monday for the next 6 weeks. And then you're like, what's going on? And those types of disruptions not only disrupt the team dynamic, but they disrupt the productivity as well. And so part of my goal is to also help employers understand, to kind of see the signs, not to diagnose, not to get involved that way, but just if they start noticing things, to maybe take someone aside and say, hey, how you doing? Well, as a matter of fact, I'm really struggling. And then if you can help them get the help they need. I know, Dave, you and I have talked many times about preventative versus secondary versus, tertiary care. And I'd love to see more primary care happening in workplace settings.
Interesting. I love that. Training the HR leaders to at least have that mental health first aid or awareness detection, early detection.
Yeah, one of the things we want to talk about today as well, Dr. Morgan, is just burnout in general, right? Whether that's high achievers in the workplace, it could be anything from, entrepreneurs to individual contributors, but also just, stay-at-home mom or just anything, right? Like we all face burnout. So this is a topic we want to get in with you today around burnout. And what are some of like the silent symptoms or signs that someone might be facing burnout?
I think one of the things that, well, first, just to address in general, with burnout, one of the reasons it happens is because we don't perceive emotional energy as a perishable or limited resource. Physical energy, we think about all the time. We say, oh, I got to get my rest. I have to, get my 8 hours of sleep or whatever it is, or I have to exercise so I can, build my strength. We have financial budgets, and we clearly understand that. We say, I've got $1,000 I can spend this month. And if I spend more than $1,000, then I'm in the hole. But for whatever reason, we think emotional energy is just endless, that we can do all the things. We can take on another task and another task and another task. But emotional energy needs to be allocated just like physical energy or financial capital needs to as well, because it 100% is limited. And you will get to the point where you run out. And it's so interesting. Like last night, I slept. I didn't sleep particularly well, and I was having these crazy dreams all night, weird dreams. So I don't think my mind rested all at night. I mean, like my body rested, but my mind didn't. And I always think about that because when does your mind get time to rest? And you think, oh, you do that when you sleep. Well, not necessarily, right? Some people have nightmares all night and their mind gets no break. So we have to build in time to take those breaks and to limit ourselves. And so back to your original question, part of those original signs of burnout is just this. Oftentimes it's just a lack of ambition. It's a lack of interest in things that we used to enjoy. Burnout and depression are similar. They have some similar symptoms. They're not identical because people can be burned out and not depressed. But I do think if burnout isn't addressed early on, I think it can lead to issues of depression where you just say, I can't do it all, so I'm just going to do nothing. And then we adopt kind of this dichotomous viewpoint.
Yeah, so I like the analogy to sleep, and obviously I think sleep does to some extent rejuvenate us emotionally, but in addition, so mental strength, our bodies, when we're drowsy, there's physical symptoms and we know it. How do we recognize when we're emotionally drained? I mean, if for the high achiever that just keeps going, what are those drowsy kind of signals that we can recognize in ourselves and maybe recognize in others?
One of the keys at that is to take the time to introspect on that, because you're not going to recognize anything unless you're taking the time to look inside. The body is wonderful that way because it will automatically, like you said, it'll make you drowsy. It says it's time to rest, and it kind of overrides any sort of system imperatives to keep going. The mind isn't as good at that, or maybe we have better hacks to get around that, which I don't think is very helpful, because we can keep pushing ourselves, have another 5-hour energy, have another Red Bull, right, and just keep going, until we get to the point of collapse. One of the symptoms in that is just this feeling that, just a feeling of overwhelm, where it feels like you're, I mean, drowning. I don't know if that's the right sort of thing, but where it just feels like the pressures that are on you are pushing you down more than you're floating up. And I think for high achievers, it's particularly difficult to recognize that because most high achievers have never met a challenge that they cannot vanquish. That's why they're high achievers. And so they develop this kind of narrative in their mind that they can just keep going and going and going and going and going, and they can't. I know, Dave, you and I have talked about this before, just as you've worked with Eliza Chat, and that's one of the things that you talk with Eliza about a lot is like, how do I balance this, right? Because you just want to, it's such an exciting thing, and you just want to push it, to the nth degree, but you can't.
Yeah, that's interesting. And kind of you were saying about burnout and depression and people maybe getting those confused. I just want to go back to that for a minute. Have you ever treated someone that thought maybe, yeah, I feel like I'm depressed, but it really was more just a burnout?
Yes. So if you viewed them as like, like a Venn diagram, there's overlap between the two. They're not concentric. They're not exactly the same. There is overlap. The difference usually, so anytime you're dealing with a mental health diagnosis, in about 99% of diagnoses, there is a condition that it's in all of these diagnoses that says that the symptoms must cause clinically significant impairment in one or more areas of functioning. So it has to be clinically significant impairment in work performance or relationships or academic performance or something like that. A lot of times what happens is that people, especially with the internet now, you can go in and say, what are the symptoms of depression? It'll tell you the symptoms, and you'll go, I got that, I got that, I got that, I got that, I got that. And people are self-diagnosing all over the place, which is a terrible thing to do. Quit doing that, everyone. It's just, it's not good. It's not helpful. Psychological diagnosis is almost more of an art than it is a science, because there are, in addition to the symptoms, there has to be this impairment. And that's where a professional clinician can come in and decide, is that happening or not? So what usually happens with burnout is you aren't seeing necessarily clinically significant impairment. They're getting to the point where the performance is starting to reduce a little bit, but they're not at the point where they can't show up, they're not getting out of bed, those sorts of things. So I would say that they're probably, I don't want to put them on the exact same continuum, but I would say that untreated burnout, I would say it could easily lead to depression, to the point where now you're not getting up, and you're just, you're not showing up for the podcast, you're not showing up for work, because you just literally, your brain shuts down, it kind of sensing the threat, and just says, well, we're not going to do anything.
Yeah. And the reason I asked that is, a couple of years ago, I went through a phase, which now in hindsight I was just burned out. But I remember thinking that I was going through depression, and I was doing exactly what you said, searching the internet, finding symptoms, and thinking I met a lot of the symptoms, but then being confused because I knew something was wrong, but I didn't feel depressed, meaning I was generally happy in my life. I had things I was looking forward to, but I had zero motivation to do anything work related. And I was sort of the big symptom of depression. I was having a hard time getting out of bed, not to face life, but to face work. On the weekend, no problem. On a weekday, I was like, And so I thought I was going through this depressive period, even though everything else in my life seemed to be joyful and happy. And I don't think I figured it out in my head. I think I took some time off, and I changed jobs, and I think the burnout went away. And you're helping me see in hindsight that I don't think I actually was depressed. I think I was going through a period of burnout. How common is that kind of thing?
I think it's very common, and I appreciate you sharing the example, because it does highlight a significant difference between burnout and depression. Burnout tends to be very situation specific, where depression is usually more global. Because like you said, you were burned out with whatever specific task, whatever kind of, sector of your life. You had reached an end there. But as far as going boating on the weekends, you were like, that sounds fantastic.
Yes.
I'll love to do that. Let's go get me on the lake. But a depressed person is not only going to not want to go to work, they don't want to go on the boat either. Right. And they don't want to sit down and watch their favorite movie. They've lost interest in things that they used to enjoy as well. So while I don't agree with self-diagnosis, I do think it's important for people to look at that. And if you want, and to talk to a professional as well. If you came to me 2 years ago and said, Dr. Morgan, here's what's going on in my life, and explained all those things, we could very quickly determine that you weren't depressed, because it didn't have that global feel. Because there were a lot of areas in life where you still had interest. It was just this one thing or a collection of things. And so then the question is, well, what if we make some changes to that area? And if we see positive results, then that's kind of the intervention kind of confirms the diagnosis in that case.
Yeah, interesting.
One thing I'm curious to ask you about, Dr. Morgan, is the term resilience, and like what true resilience means. Because what I see a lot, and I think there's this kind of myth around resilience, is resilience just means you could do hard things and you're functioning and you're constantly just going from thing to thing to thing. You see this a lot in the tech world, right? Where you just have, either serial entrepreneurs or just doing this and that, when really, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts, true resilience is, I like what you said earlier, like that emotional energy. And, if you think of it like a gas tank, like true resilience and long-term resilience might be more, you're focused on that every day and like recharging. That's like true long-term resilience. Is that true? What's your thoughts around resilience and like the myth of what people think of resilience is?
I love the concept of emotional resilience, and first started really studying it during COVID because COVID, it was the most interesting thing because I don't remember a time, at least in my life, where the entire world was dealing with the same emotional stressor all at once. There have been big things that have happened, like in the US, 9/11 or something like that. And I think that did affect the world, but some places less significantly than others. But COVID-19, every single place was dealing with this. And so it was just fascinating to see how is everyone going to kind of manage this really emotionally difficult thing. And when I studied it, I read a bunch of different definitions. These researchers, Connor and Davidson, they had my favorite one, and I'm going to try to remember it. It's personal qualities that enable one to thrive in the face of adversity. So it's not just getting through things, it's using adversity and difficulty as fuel to fill your tank. And I don't know that a lot of people actually get there. I think that's a great thing to aspire to, like bring on the next challenge because I need more fuel. But I think that truly resilient people, that's what they do. They don't just kind of white knuckle and get through the trial. They're able to analyze the trial and say, what is it about this? How can this benefit me? How can I learn from this? And then they kind of turn it on its head. So instead of a difficulty, it becomes a blessing to them.
That's a great definition. I love that.
Yeah. Are there, when we talk about the difference between coping and thriving, which you were just kind of talking about, you consult with HR in businesses. You talked about helping HR people recognize signs and know how to talk to people about it. But what about in terms of programs that businesses can run internally to strengthen their workforce? So there's two sides, but there's the recognition. How do we properly manage our mental health of our workforce from a compliance and legal standpoint? But what about how do we build and strengthen our workforce to make them more resilient so that they're thriving and not just coping?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think at least my answer for it is a little simplistic. And I don't know why I think of this example, but I think about as like in a family, if you're trying to build relationships, and let's say a father is trying to, build a relationship with his children and connect with them. And so he says, well, there's one of two things I can do. I could once a year, I could take them to Lake Powell and we'll rent a houseboat for 2 weeks and we'll just have the greatest time, just 100% dedicated time, dad and kids. But then for the rest of the 50 weeks, we don't talk at all. I don't see them. I don't interact with them. But we have a really, really good time on that 2 weeks versus the dad who says, you know what, we don't have the money to go to Lake Powell, but you know what, just every night I'm just going to talk with them and say, hey, how was your day today? How'd you do? And then maybe on Saturdays we go and get some ice cream or something like that. Nothing really structured, nothing super planned, but just there's this ongoing regular interaction between the father and his children. Guaranteed, the better relationship is going to develop between the regular kind of low-key interactions versus this, amazing once a year thing. And so I think that's where businesses, sometimes they'll say, okay, we're going to bring in the greatest motivational speaker, right? This woman who's just amazing and everyone loves her and she does backflips on the stage and everything. So they spend $30,000 to bring her out and get everyone together and everyone loves it and everyone has a great time. And then no one mentions resilience for the next, 8 months or 10 months or something like that. I think HR and managers, if they can just develop relationships with their employees and just check in with them regularly and just say, how you doing? How are you feeling today? Or really great job on what you did last week. Or, hey, I've noticed that you haven't been quite as whatever on as you have in times past. Anything I can help with? I think that's going to make a bigger difference than kind of these tentpole experiences. So the bad news is that requires a lot more effort, kind of consistent effort on the part of HR and managers. The good news is it's cheaper. You don't have to pay anyone. You're already paying these people, and just talk.
So that the big mental health awareness event, that might be good, and not to discourage that, but just doing that once a quarter and checking the box and saying we're managing mental health because we have an event once a quarter or something, that's not necessarily as effective.
No, and if you can do both, then fantastic, do both. But I think if you had to choose between one or the other, then it would be just those regular low-key interactions with people. You want your employees to know that you care for them, and that they can come to you in a crisis or something like that. Just building those relationships is so critical for kind of stability in the workplace. The other thing is that's going to likely improve retention as well. They're going to feel valued. They're going to feel like a valued part of the work machine, and retaining people, especially now, is so important because they're it's 1,000 times cheap. Well, not 1,000 times, but it's way cheaper to keep an employee than to lose one and hire a new one.
Absolutely. So, sorry, I just want to jump in or dive in further on that real quick. The business talking about it regularly, letting employees know that their mental health matters to leadership. What about as a personal example of leaders? And what I'm thinking of is, we say, you got to find boundaries and you got to, make sure you take time to rest. But the leaders are workaholics who are never taking time off, or the leaders are struggling in mental health or whatever. What are some things that leaders can do from an example standpoint?
I love that because when I work with parents and raising teenagers, I always tell them, I said, you can say anything you want, and if your behavior is different than that, they're going to notice that immediately, and they're going to not believe anything you've said before that. I mean, your example is so much more powerful than what you say.
It's like this, son, get off your phone.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And so I think one of the challenges that businesses face, you probably can't find a business on the face of the planet that does not have something regarding mental health or care for their employees in their mission statement, right? It's going to be in there. It's important to have, and it's, it's the right thing for the right time. But like you said, if the top-down leadership is not showing that example, I think it's going to be tough for people to see that.
I worked at Google for 10 years, and they had a very generous parental leave policy for fathers and mothers when you had a child. And this was the first time I'd ever experienced that in my life. And particularly as a father, and I had a child, but it was very generous. And I was like, I don't know if it's appropriate to take time off. But what I thought was cool was Sergey, one of the co-founders of Google, when I was a brand new employee, this is back in 2009, he took like 2 months off when he had a baby. And then I remember a couple years later, Susan Wojcinski, who was a vice president, she took like 6 months off or something when she had a baby. And that's when I thought, oh, it's actually okay to the leave that you've been given. It's actually okay to take it off. And I thought that was just, for me, a cool example, not specifically around mental health per se, but just, yes, to the extent of taking time off when you needed, but I love just that it wasn't something that was just said, but that it was meant by and demonstrated by leaders.
Right. Well, and that's been 10 years ago, and you're still remembering this. Yeah. That's the impact that it had on you, and something that still sticks in your mind. I think that's the power of these sorts of things. So the leadership saying, yeah, of course it's okay to take time off. Of course, it's okay to to recharge and things like that. I also think that the healthy expression of your own challenges is so good as well. I don't think it does much good at all to kind of pretend that we're not struggling, because everyone's struggling out there. Everyone's dealing with something all the time. Whether it's a small amount or whether it's a significant amount, everyone is dealing with something. And to pretend that that's not happening, it's just disingenuous, and it's not helpful in a business setting. I remember years ago, I was talking with a woman who had been struggling to remain clean and sober. And and she'd had multiple relapses over many years. And she was finally at the point, she had about 9 months under her belt. It was the longest time ever. And it looked like she was probably, turning the corner. And she said to me how she was disappointed, though, because she had a young daughter that she had lost custody of. She had maintained contact with her, but she wasn't in her custody. And she says, I just feel like I'm going to be the worst example to my daughter. And I said, are you kidding? You're the most amazing example to your daughter, because your daughter's going to have problems in her life. And she's going to look at you and she can say, you know what? Mom had problems and she dealt with her problems and she vanquished her problems. I can do that too. I said, I would 100% lean into that. I mean, not necessarily all the gory detail, but just say, you know what? It's okay to struggle. And so I think when leaders model that, and when they say, I've struggled with mental health, or I am struggling with mental health, I see a counselor once a week or whatever, I think there's an implicit permission there for people then to say, okay, I don't have to put on airs. And how much easier would that make it for the employee to go to her manager and just say, you know what, I really appreciated what the CEO said the other day. And I've been struggling with some anxiety as well. And I'd love to see, what help I can get for that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think, and Dave, that's a good example. I think it might be easy for listeners to think, oh, Google, established company, of course he could take 2 months off, right? But where I see this as a huge challenge, and I think this does need to change in society, is in startups, younger startups, right? Because that's that whole culture of hey, you have to work 80 hours to survive. This is what a startup is. So if you don't want to be a part of it, then don't be a part of it, right? So but on the other side of it, about high performance and high function, if you're having this environment of balance and true resilience and emotional recharging every day, that should lead to high performance, right? What are you seeing there in the startup world, Dr. Morgan?
I see exactly what you're describing. There's this myth, I guess, that it just has to be the grind all the time, and I'll see people sometimes in established companies. I'll see one of two things. I'll see there's one thing I like and one thing I don't like. The ones I like are the ones that say, you know what? As I look back on it, I probably could have done less. I could have taken some time, I mean, you still have to work hard. I get it. It's a startup, but I could have taken an hour a day to meditate or to go with my kids down to the park or something like that. Because they know that they still would have survived, right? Because they had a good idea, they were working hard, and it was going to be successful. I don't know that. And then I'll see I saw something just the other day, a COO from a very well-established company, and he had said, they asked about the grind, and he's like, oh yeah, you got to grind as a startup. And I'm just like, no, don't say that. That's the last thing they need to hear from you, because they view you as successful. That's the last thing they need to hear. Help them achieve some balance and say, of course you have to work hard, but part of working smart is taking time and realizing that to maximize performance, you have to rest.
Yeah, I think that's what's important. Is there may be people listening who go, no, I want to be successful, so I am going to work hard. But if even professional athletes take 1 day a week off to rest their bodies, almost all of them do. And those that don't have the longevity in their careers. If you look at LeBron James, he's actually even been criticized because he'll rest some games and take time and they call him weak. But anyone who calls LeBron James weak, look at his career. He's performing this late in his career at a higher level, I would say, than anyone. And you can say Michael Jordan is the greatest player. And I'm definitely in that camp when we get into basketball. and that LeBron's maybe in the top 5 there. But in terms of this late in his career, I don't know that there are many that were achieving this high. He's taking care of his body and he's taking care of himself. And that's different. That mindset has come into sports later than it used to. And so you have these high performing athletes in generations past that were amazing, but didn't have the longevity in their careers that we're seeing people do now. And it's the same. So even if you're saying, no, you know what, this is the most important thing in my life and I don't have a family or that's not a priority for me. Like my business is my top priority. That's fine. But you got to recognize that even if that is your top priority, you can't perform at your best if you're not taking time to rest your mind, to think about other things, to have some vacation. You can't.
Yeah, well, there's so many analogies. I like the physical analogy, right? Because from a professional athlete perspective, it obviously doesn't make sense just to be going 24/7 with no active recovery, because eventually you're going to get injured, right? And that's going to be a constant theme in your career, and you do see that. But knowing there's this active recovery, whether that's an athlete sitting in an ice bath or something for their muscles or whatever that may be. What are, in the mental health world, Dr. Morgan, what is the mental version of active recovery? I'm sure it's not scrolling on your phone, right? And there's still cognitive load there, right? Like, what are ways to not have extreme cognitive load and to have mental recovery?
So, yeah, I love that. And I, just to go back to the example of the physical recovery and LeBron James, my guess is what he's doing is extremely intentional, right? It's not just like, oh, I'm feeling tired today, I'm going to take a day off. You could probably look at his calendar and he's decided at what points he's going to rest, right? That's built into the system. And not just when I start to feel tired. And that's what we need to do for our mental as well. Because otherwise you'll just go and go and go and go. And you say, well, I'll get to that later. You can't do that. You have to say, this is the time I'm going to take every day. And I say every day because I do think it needs to be a daily thing. I don't think it needs to be a lot of time, but I do think it needs to be a daily thing where you say, at this time every day is when I take time out for myself. Probably one of the most important things we can do, especially like you mentioned with the scrolling and stuff, is some act of meditation. And just and there's so many free resources out there. If you Google just guided meditations, there's going to be 100 free resources pop up. All of them are great. There's really not much to it, but just to take time to slow your brain down. The scrolling is an interesting experience because it seems relaxing, but it's not, right? Because you're just hitting your brain over and over and over again, like a half a second at a time. I mean, and for your brain to have to be constantly adjusting to this is not healthy, and so.
So it's just an interesting idea. I'm laying in my bed or I'm laying on the couch scrolling, thinking I'm resting. Yes. And while I might be in a state of physical rest, my brain is not. It's the opposite because we're firing a lot of information at it quickly. That's interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a different sort of, your brain isn't thinking about the other things, right? You're not thinking about work or the other things that you're trying to get a break from. So in a way, it's a break, but it's not the kind of break that you want. It'd be like LeBron James saying, I'm going to rest for basketball today, so I'm going to go run 30 miles, right? That's, so he's not playing basketball, but his body is still engaging in something that's going to require rest. So it's not just about shifting up the type of engagement your brain has. You really want to get to the point of almost no engagement. And that's what meditation does. It just allows you to just sit and reflect, just to kind of notice your thoughts as they pass by. And like I said, there's so many different options. You could pick whatever works for you. Some people combine it with like stretching or like simple yoga, things like that. Man, I tell you, these yogis, they're going to live forever. These people will be like 170 years old because just reducing that cognitive load on your brain is so important.
Yeah, that's why I bring that up. I think a lot of listeners and a lot of us just in general will think if it's not work, then it's recovery, but that's not necessarily
right.
the
That's
truth,
not
right?
necessarily
At all.
No.
So you could, just because you're scrolling TikTok or Netflix and chill, like that doesn't mean you're, active recovery or emotional, bank per se,
That's exactly right.
You're giving me an idea. One of the things I do sometimes to recover is I sit in the hot tub, but I have my phone and I'm catching up on email. And I'm just thinking, I probably just need to just not do that. That's giving me
just the hot tub. Yeah. Well, and that's, and part of the problem, Dave, is that we're busy, and especially, founders and entrepreneurs, they are busy. And I get that. And I'm not saying that you should spend 8 hours a day meditating. That's the thing. You just have to take some time. And I think there's a couple of things happen. Not only do you get the benefit from the meditation, but just the very act of you taking a break in your schedule intentionally, it almost sends a message to yourself of just saying, I'm important and my mental health is important. And I think that reinforces itself over time as well. By saying, I'm going to literally stop what I'm doing right now, even though I've got 30 things that need to be done. I've got all these emails that need to be responded to. I'm going to sit in the hot tub for 30 minutes and do nothing, or listen to my favorite album or whatever it is, and just literally relax.
Well, that's what we're all about at the Mental Fitness Podcast, right? It's like this daily, what are the daily things you can do, right? And be intentional about it. It's easy, on the physical side, is if you want to get fit, physically fit, then you're going to start carving in your daily calendar workout routine. That could be 20 minutes or 30 minutes, right? But when you have that same intention mentally, most people don't think about that, but it's so, so important.
And the other thing that's so interesting is that, like, becoming physically fit there's the things you need to do, the effort you need to make, right? Becoming mentally fit is almost the opposite. It's what am I not going to do?
Yeah, right.
What am I going to subtract from this?
The Western versus Eastern philosophy.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, and both of them have to be intentional, but one involves an engagement in something difficult and one involves a disengagement from something difficult. So yeah, it's interesting.
That's a very interesting idea. What can in the physical, it's what do I need to add to? Because we're generally speaking not active enough. So what are the things I need to start doing? In the mental world, there are some things we can start doing, but we're probably need to start thinking about things we can stop doing. So for example, some of the big mental fitness hygiene things that we've come across is cutting off screen time an hour plus before bed, reducing the amount of social media engagement and doom scrolling. And so as you say that, resonates true to me that a lot of the things that we've been learning about mental fitness are removing from. That's and even like you said, the meditation, the act of meditation, while that's something I proactively go do, what meditation is just trying to remove thoughts from your mind and clear your mind. Interesting.
Yeah, it's addition by subtraction. Yeah.
Maybe not as much in the daily, but when someone is in this point of burnout and they're just in this job or this point of their career, whatever it is, they're just totally burnt out. That as the result of them not doing those daily things. But when they're in that state, what does someone do? How do we get out of that state? And it's probably more than just starting the 5 minutes a day habits. That's more preventative. But when I'm in that state, I'm so burnt out. I can't even imagine working another day in my life, but I have to. So how do I recover from that?
So you have to talk with someone. You have to get a sounding board because most of this stuff is happening in your head, right? It's just all these thoughts, all these things, and you need to get a different perspective. So, a friend, a colleague, a therapist, or whatever, just sit down and say, this is what's going on, and just lay it all out on the table. I think once you start to get it out of your mind and deconstruct it in front of you, then you start to see it for what it is. Like you were saying, am I depressed or am I burned out? But once you unpack that, you're like, oh, clearly you're just burned out because, like I said, you look forward to the Saturday activities, the non-work activities. So I think it's so important to just kind of shine a light on everything that's going on. I think that's the easiest and best thing someone can do at first. And then you can take a look at it and say, okay, what could I add? What could I subtract? Am I really that burned out, or was this just a bad couple of weeks? Those sorts of things. But having someone else who can be an objective voice in that is so important, because all that stuff going on in your head is so subjective, and it almost becomes this echo chamber of our own thoughts and opinions. And we can't really escape that, especially when you're at that point. So talk to someone, trusted someone, get their opinion. If they agree with you 100% on everything, talk with someone else. You want to find someone who disagrees with you on something.
Yeah, right. Which is why ChatGPT may not be a good partner on that, because they just agree with whatever you say. Right?
I said someone.
Yes,
talking about a carbon-based life form here. So
yeah, I like that. What about just taking a week of vacation? I mean, how helpful is that? Just, I'm feeling burnout, I'm just going to take some time off.
I think it could be helpful, but only if you're willing to do something about it while you're on the week of vacation, right? If it's just pure distraction, then it's no good, because you're going to come back to the exact same situation. I think about people who are addicted to substances, and so let's say they live in a bad part of town, and there's all sorts of access to different drugs, and they say, you know what, I got to get clean. I'm tired of this. I'm just going to go vacation in a week for a week in a place where there's no access to drugs. Fantastic, right? And then you come home, right? And you come home and it's all there again, right?
Right. The relapse rate is high, which is why often in substance abuse, the detox clinics, they have really high relapse rates, because all the triggers and stresses and things that were causing substance abuse at home, when you return home, you relapse.
And I think that, so if someone decided to go to a treatment center, I think that's wonderful. But it's not just 4 weeks of vacation and staying away from drugs. You're learning things during that time as well. You're getting skills. You're developing a different social network, people you can talk to, people you can reach out when you're stressed. And even if you have no other choice but to go back to that old situation, at least you've changed internally. So I think that taking time off is great, but it has to be with a plan to come back different. And not just, I'm just going to forget about things for a week. Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen that in work, actually, in working with other leaders, where they get to this point of burnout. And they're like, I just need some time off. And then they leave for a week or two. They come back and they're burnt out within 2 days again. Like, it's just like, so that makes a lot of sense. It's more of a distraction in that sense than like actually resolving the issue and helping them.
I like what you said there. Is it a distraction or is it recovery? And if it's just a distraction.
Right, exactly. There's this great episode of The Simpsons that I remember, just pop culture comes to mind. And Marge is she's so stressed out about the kids, like her hair is falling out. There's like big clumps of hair missing from her big blue hairdo. And so she and Homer decide to go to a spa for a week. And so she goes to the spa and relaxes. Her hair grows back. Then she comes home within 30 seconds after being home, her hair falls out again, right? It's just the same thing, because all the same stressors are back there. And so distraction versus recovery, I think that's a great way. Distraction really is not helpful at all, because it doesn't really, it's wasted time in not thinking about something where you could have used that time to be intentional about what am I going to do about this. But distraction is easy, and that's why we like to do it, because it makes us feel better in the moment. But it's just like a dopamine hit, or doing a line of cocaine or something like that. It's temporary.
Well, I think that's what social media is too, right? Is distraction most of the time. So that's one of the biggest things I've learned in this episode today with Dr. Morgan is, it's what can you do less of? Reducing that cognitive load is the best way to recover, right? So, and daily as well.
Right. Yeah. And just that idea of distractions, social media you mentioned, Luke, but the social media, some people, it's video games, doom scrolling, and some it becomes substance abuse or pornography or other addictions. But those are distractions. And that's just an interesting idea, because I know some people say, well, no, this is how I unwind. But distraction versus active recovery, that's a great concept.
Well, and maybe it is how they unwind, and I'm not going to fault anyone for trying to unwind in a certain situation. But if you think that's recovery, you're wrong. So unwinding, that's great, but that's not going to build your emotional resilience. So, just make a decision about what you want to do. And if you say, I don't want to build any resilience today, I just want to unwind, that's great. You can do that, but don't confuse the two.
Yeah, very good. What is something that you're personally experimenting with when it comes to your own mental fitness?
For me, it's exactly what I've been talking about. I need to take more time to disengage. I've got so many things on my plate right now, and it can just become so overwhelming. It's actually very interesting because the last 4 days ago, I ended up getting a pretty bad cold, and I was sick for a few days, couldn't do much. But I noticed that emotionally, I felt better because it's like I wasn't thinking about all the other things I usually think about, and I was like, oh, this feels kind of nice. I'm not worried about the future because I didn't have the bandwidth, like the physical bandwidth, to deal with it because I just felt crummy, and so I was like, I realized about 2 days into it, I thought, you know what? In the last 2 days, I have not worried about several things that have been on my mind constantly for the past couple months. And I liked the experience of it. And so for me, I'm like, okay, how can I achieve that without, without being sick? And I think it is just a matter of being intentional. It's just having to look at things a little bit differently. And, and there's a lot of unknown out there. I don't like the unknown, and that kind of drives my anxiety at times, but the unknown is all the time. It's constant. And so I need to just get to the point where I can say, you know what? It's okay not to know about this. Look at reality and say, this is okay, this is okay, this is okay, this is okay. To have these unknowns is not a big deal right now. If they're still unknown in 6 months, even despite my best efforts, then I need to do something different. But this kind of daily fretting about that stuff hasn't been helpful. So anyway, that little sickness taught me a couple things. I need to step back. I tell you, you'd think as a psychologist you could figure all this stuff out. You don't. I mean, we're as crazy as anybody's out there. So it's just, we got the tools. You just have to apply them to yourself.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, this has been amazing, Dr. Morgan. So insightful. I wish we could go on and on, but we do a segment at the end of each episode. It's just a rapid fire question segment. It's not even necessarily mental health related, just kind of some fun questions as well. So don't think too much about the answers, just kind of the first thing that comes to mind. Dave, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah. Morning person or night owl?
Morning person.
If you could spend a day with any historical figure, who would it be?
Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, that's a good one. Something that instantly brings you joy.
Music.
If you weren't in your current profession, what do you think you'd be doing?
On Broadway.
Thinking of your ideal weekend, is it packed with plans or totally unscheduled?
I don't like either of those two choices. Moderately scheduled.
There we go. Moderately scheduled.
If you could instantly master any skill, what would it be?
Oh, playing the piano.
Very good. Well, I like that. It fits in with what instantly brings you joy is good music. One food you'll never say no to.
Oh, a chili cheese dog from Wiener Schnitzel.
Oh, that's a good one.
Good one.
That's hilarious. That's a great one to end on.
Now I know where I'm going for lunch.
Yeah, seriously.
Well, this is great. I think for me, the biggest takeaway was active recovery versus distraction. I mean, I think I'd thought a lot about things related to that, but just the idea that if I think I'm recovering when I'm just distracting my mind, it's very short-lived and short-term. That was my main sort of big idea takeaway from this. What about you, Luke? What was the main?
That was mine as well. I kind of shared my summary a little earlier, but I think it's that. I think something I've been thinking about is it's hard. Like, it truly takes intention, because all of those distractions drive dopamine spikes, and your brain wants that, right? Like your brain craves that. So it's not easy. Like you can get into a routine of it, but to start out, it takes true intention, just like an athlete has intention, like you said, Dr. Morgan, to actively recover their body.
Yeah, and I think the second big idea with that first one's more personal application. The second one is for business leaders. I love the analogy of the parent who does the big vacation once a year with no other interaction versus daily interactions with their child. Who's going to have a stronger relationship? It's clearly the latter. And that as we as leaders of organizations think about mental health in the workplace, having that big quarterly or semi-annual event where we talk about mental health, that's great, but insufficient by itself. And that more importantly is the regular, consistent, it's something that matters.
Yeah. If that's all you can do, then do that. Like if you're a cash-strapped business that is just barely making ends meet, then just do that. Cost you nothing, and literally maybe 5 minutes a day just to check in with people. It's going to make a big difference.
Awesome. Well, appreciate it, Dr. Morgan. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you very much.